IVM.
A lot of us are willing to pay rupees 799 for a Netflix subscription. Many of us are willing to pay rupees 400 or more for a Tata Sky subscription. But the question is, are we willing to pay for truth? Technology has turned all of us into publishers, broadcasters, and disseminators of content. In today's times, we are the media and we are the medium. What we read, what we share gains currency. But are we stopping by to check what we are sharing, what we are consuming? Organized misinformation or disinformation, as it is called, is being used for many things today, including in political warfare. As consumers, we're certainly asking the brands to be truthful and authentic. We want to know what ingredients are going into the products that we are using. But perhaps we aren't asking the same question of the content that we are consuming or the fake news that we are getting in our WhatsApp groups. Our guest today would like all of us to participate in the public discourse or consume our own social media feed with a little backing from data and truth. Welcome to Speak Easy with Dheeraj Sinha, and today I'm talking to Govind Raj Ethiraj. Govind is a journalist and entrepreneur. He started India's first data journalism initiative, India Spend, which aims to ignite informed discourses on the fundamental aspects of our economy and life. He talks about health, infrastructure, and education. He has also co-founded two other media organizations, Fact Checker and Boom. Govind was founder-editor for the television channel Bloomberg UTV. Govind, welcome to Speak Easy with Dheeraj Sinha.
Thank you very much, Dheeraj, for having me. It's an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a great conversation. Govind, I wanted to start with this whole space from a brand marketing, consumer observation perspective. We talk about that consumers today are looking for the truth, right? If you look at the whole rise in direct-to-consumer brands, partly they've happened because, if you look at the back of the label, it's all being told that this product contains so and so stuff. It has SLS, it has paraben, etc. In fact, what's occurring is that the newer new age brands which are being built on the digital medium are putting pressure back on the legacy brands to say, what ingredients are you using? Where are your products getting manufactured? What are the practices that you're using? So there is, not maybe at such a huge widespread level, but there seems to be a culture of wanting to know the truth, of wanting to seek honesty and transparency, right? But at the same time, right, we also see on social media and otherwise, there's certain narrative which is being fed and it goes like wildfire, like nobody's business. And then you're like, did nobody check for the fact and what's going on here? So it looks like we're simultaneously living into opposing worlds. Or is that so? Are these different audiences? What are your experiences? What are your observations around these?
So let me give you a quick history, and the advent of misinformation or fake news or disinformation, when it's organized misinformation is called disinformation. And disinformation today is run by military industrial complexes across the world, in many countries, and uses technology very efficiently. So let me give you the history and the one or two examples that make the most sense. In 2016, Donald Trump won the US presidential elections. In the run-up to the US presidential elections, there was a barrage of fake news or misinformation, but delivered to people who were willing recipients in very, very creative ways. Created by people who did not even know it would be used for that. So they were, for instance, people sitting in Macedonia creating completely fake news websites. For instance, a website would say, "Oh, did you know that Hillary Clinton is a witch?" Or did you know that the Pope has blessed Donald Trump to become the president of the United States? So all these websites were creating content and largely for the lark and for Google revenue earning they found or they figured that it was becoming popular and they started doing more of it and they started earning revenue from Google. So it became popular because of the efforts put in by a bunch of people sitting in one corner of the world. Now, what was happening in the other side across the Atlantic, so to speak, was that there were some very smart people who decided that if we want to win this election, we have to figure out who is aligned to our cause. So then comes in who had an organization that had done some very interesting techno-social experiments and work around in other parts of the world, that is Cambridge Analytica. So what did Cambridge Analytica do? They managed to pinpoint almost 80 million Americans who had very clear preferences, likes, dislikes, with something only technology using Facebook data could pull out and understand. So effectively, it knew at the end of the day, an algorithm combining focus groups and hard, real on-ground insights with data points could know what Dheeraj was about or what Govind was about better than their own family members knew them.
Yeah.
Because the way we behave and consume, the way we move from, let's say, one subject to the other, accept, reject, is something that we don't even share with our dear and dear ones, and we cannot.
Yeah.
But technology can pick this up. So the system did was to basically ensure that all this misinformation was delivered to those people who already were clearly aligned with the cause of electing Donald Trump. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the thing is, and as the flow began to get big, more and more, and it became evident that people were so enthralled by this miasma of misinformation or disinformation that they would believe it regardless. So, for instance, if people were told later that, oh, listen, we have proof, and here is the proof that Donald Trump never met the Pope, the run-up to the presidential elections, people would say, no, you're wrong. Or no, it must be true. So that is the power of misinformation. That is the power of messaging when it's used for the wrong purposes. And that is why truth in itself can be a victim. Now, if you were to say that, okay, I was a victim of, let's say, knowingly or unknowingly, some disinformation stream, whether I was living in America or India or some other country at some point of time, either for political or non-political reasons. And I continue to be a victim because many other people are using some kind of messaging to target me. I gave you the example of an election. It could be something else. I think what happens then is, or begins to happen, is that my trust in anything and everything begins to lessen. Remember that we've already stopped trusting, we in the sense a large number of people, particularly young people, have stopped trusting mainstream media.
Absolutely.
And you combine that with the erosion of trust because of this continuous messaging, which you half trust, are not sure, want to believe, like to believe. And I feel somewhere in all of this, the message itself, even if delivered by more and more honest people or honest brands, begins to start losing its value. And that is, I think, where we are today.
Your sense, Govind, is that from a consumer perspective, because we are lulled into so much of, say, mechanized and organized and at scale misinformation or disinformation, you're saying our sensibility or our sensitivity to be able to wean the truth out of it has weakened as well? Or would it lead to a counterculture of saying, because now we know that we could be fed, because now we know that whether it's the consumption economy or the political economy, that messages are being manufactured and fed. Are there sections of people, say younger or millennial, whose antennas are say more up, who are now, for example, in the consumer economy, are checking the back of the pack that do you have arsenic, do you have SLS? Do you see the rise of that counterculture at all or no?
So there is a counterculture. I don't know if it's rising as yet. I mean, it's definitely there. It's strong. Evidence seems to suggest it's more prevalent in younger people, but this is more anecdotal than anything else. That younger people question more, would tend to disbelieve almost everything. But at the same time, I think where we are right now, in the middle of all of this, Dheeraj, if we had emerged from this and we look back, we could have said that, okay, this is what happened. But today we are in the middle of it. And it's very difficult to say right now whether that message that you are giving out as a communicator, as a brand, as a journalist, is it being received and absorbed for the right reasons? Or is it being received only because I'm giving it out and only because I'm fulfilling some other either entertainment quotient or emotional quotient that listener or receiver of that information might have? Or it might be, for instance, let's say, again, to use the US example, it whips up a certain emotional chords or even frenzy. If you look at what happened on the 6th of January or 7th of January in the United States, the storming of the Capitol, it was whipped up by a continuous flow of misinformation, right? And it was so bizarre when you look at those messages, when you look at the kind of things that people were saying. And to come back to your point, I mean, you really wonder, we are living in two different worlds. Now, could both these worlds, however, be completely sane when it comes to buying that next bar of soap? I don't know. So that's a question that I have to throw back at you, unfortunately, Dheeraj, because this is, like I said, we're in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure it out. I mean, we're being bombarded
Yeah.
by good people, by bad people,
Yeah.
by not so good people.
Yeah.
But
No, you're right.
And somewhere we are processing
Yeah,
this.
you're right. I think we are seeing both behaviors, right? We are seeing a behavior, what I call India is a wave country, right? And we like standing in the longest queues, right? So if there's so many people at some place, right? I mean, for example, all the popularity myths of all the roadside vendors in India is about, this guy serves from 11:30 to 12:15, and if you go beyond that, everything's finished. Nobody talks about the quality of the food, the fact that the person is so popular, the fact that there are so many people, right? So we take popularity as surrogate for truth and quality, right? So we are a wave country, and things which work, right? The worst kind of a product can work if everybody's using it, right? I mean, in automotive, for example, I mean, the cars which sell most in India aren't the safest cars. I mean, in fact, they're very tin-like, right? But they sell because you can't go wrong buying a car of the most popular brand because everybody's buying. So we see that, but we also see a dramatic rise, at least on the digital online younger medium, of brands and audiences who are questioning brands back, who are questioning their authority, who are questioning authorities of really, really long time legacy trusted brands and saying, what do you have? What are you giving me? What are you feeding me? So we're seeing both. We're seeing a simultaneously kind of a polarized behavior set, if I may say. I mean,
Dheeraj, let me quote an example to you. The Advertising Standards Council of India did a study recently, or rather they put out the study recently, and they found that only 12 of 332 advertisements relating to COVID were actually true.
Yeah.
Okay, now these are advertisements that are there on the front page of your newspaper.
Yeah.
Since older people like me and you to some extent also still consume print. And I'm sure elsewhere too. I'm sure television, I'm sure digital. And, and this is stuff like saying, oh, here is a air purifier or something which will kill the germs. Yeah. Something else, take this and it'll build you will completely be protected, and well-known brands.
Yeah.
And I wondered, because I remember one or two brands specifically in the Ayurvedic space.
Yes.
That how could they do that?
Yeah.
Because at least one brand is a well-known older brand. And, I'm thinking, will they, one is, do they think they can get away with it? Maybe. Second is, they're playing with science.
Yeah.
Right. And third is, don't they feel that their consumers are going to get upset when they find out that it's not going to prevent them from getting COVID? Because all it does is rightfully build immunity, and anything can, lots of things can build immunity. But the number is what amazed me. I remember seeing all these advertisements in the last year, and this is the ASCII number, right? 12 of 332.
Yeah.
So now you see, if the next time I see an advertisement, and I think I saw again another one in the paper just a couple of days ago, saying that this is going to kill them or whatever, right? How am I going to believe it? So maybe in the case of COVID, because as a journalist, I'm reporting on it, I'm a little aware and I'm pretty clear what the science says. Maybe other people don't.
Yeah.
And maybe they're still buying it. And I doubt how many people even know that ASCII found all these, ads as curious.
No, my sense really there is that, people have so much of disbelief of advertisements. And I say so even while I run an advertising agency, right? So we are painfully aware of it. And therefore the whole idea of how we now craft brands or how we craft messaging is also changing, right? The really smart ones, brands, etc., would never put out a incredible message out there because today you'll get found out in a jiffy, right? It's such a huge mistake to try and mislead people and consumers today, because maybe 80% of them will not see it, but 20% will see it, and then 20% will make so much noise that it will kill all your equity that you've built, right? So I would honestly say there's a mistake. A lot of clients, for example, come today, and you may know that there was a case called Puff, right? A certain refrigerator brand sold itself saying it has Puff, and Puff was nothing. It's a basic construct.
Polyurethane.
Yeah, it's a basic construct of every refrigerator system. And today, when clients come and say create a Puff, I would tell them you cannot. Because in today's day and age of transparency and information, you cannot fake it, right? And it's more dangerous to try and do that than be authentic, right? And we go more on relevance and connecting with people and telling a real story rather than claiming something about your product that you may not do or that you may not have, really.
Right.
I want to ask you, Govind, about the several brands and the several offerings that you're championing. There's India Spend, there's Fact Checker, and there's Boom. Right. I want to understand the philosophy, the thinking behind these, brands. How are you navigating it, and also what's the response you're seeing from both stakeholders and from people? My question to you when we were talking was that people are willing to pay 1,500 or whatever for a OTT subscription. Are people willing to pay for the truth?
I very much doubt they're willing to pay for the truth. Time, and before I answer that question, there have been many studies that have been done, again, post the 2016 elections in the United States, and including by MIT and other leading investigative journals. The thing is that in most cases, people believe what they like to believe, and even if presented evidence to the contrary, they will not change their minds. And that is human nature. So those who learned early in the game to capitalize on this have really done it well and maybe continue to do so. Let me give you one or two quick examples from India. There was this story that or a picture that showed this girl who was pulling a hand cart with a man sitting behind. And the girl was a young girl, well-dressed. And they said, look at this girl. I think it said something to the effect of this rickshaw puller's daughter who passed out of IIT. And look at her, she's done so well and all of that. So that's number one. Number two, there was this photograph of Nirmala Sitharaman, our present finance minister, who was then defense minister, standing with a young girl in a aviator's uniform, standing next to a fighter jet, saying that, look at mother and daughter both serving the country. And everyone was thrilled and, congratulations, and that's great. And we knew it and all of that, right? Both photographs are fake. Yeah. As much as, obviously, it was Nirmala Sitharaman standing next to a girl, but that girl was not her daughter. Yeah. And similarly, in the other case, that was not, the daughter of the rickshaw owner or whatever. Yeah. But in both cases, people believed it because they felt it was a good story.
It's a cultural conditioning.
So they said that, oh, no, but it's a nice story. It just feels good. My own friends. I said, boss, what are you saying? This is fake. Yeah. No, acha dikhta hai. But acha lagta hai. Yeah. So people somewhere, and which is, I guess, the biggest challenge, and it's a challenge and an opportunity, I guess, are suspending belief. Yeah. And in the world of misinformation and fake news globally, we see it all the time. And there is a temporary suspension of belief. Therefore, people forward it thinking that, others should know it too, without applying their own critical thinking. So anyway, let me come back to India Spend. And we started it with the objective of improving the quality of public discourse. Yeah. And my idea was that how do we use data and evidence to tell stories, particularly in public interest, areas like health, education, environment, and gender, which are foundational. The issues in these areas go back decades, if not more. This is not about this government or that government or whatever, but, because we have to focus on this. And I do believe, because I spent many years as a financial journalist, that we needed more journalists covering these areas, because unless there is coverage, then these problems will never get highlighted in the manner they're supposed to. Otherwise you're always dependent on governments and their wisdom, which is fine, but there has to be reporting. Yeah. People have to talk about, the health. With thanks to COVID in a very bizarre way, we can see the problems with our healthcare system today in a most stark way. Yeah. But till COVID happened, we didn't know what are our fault lines. Yeah. Do we have enough hospitals? Do we have enough beds? Do we have enough oxygen? Do we have enough ICUs? Yeah. All that is now become can we distribute vaccines? Can we manufacture vaccines? Yes, we can, more than anyone else. But can we distribute them efficiently? Maybe not. Do we have the software to monitor all of this? Perhaps yes. But do we have the smartness to go out and negotiate deals for vaccines globally and make sure that at least 500 million people get it? Yeah. Maybe not. Yeah. Can we move fast enough? Maybe not. So that's the kind of thing that India Spend focuses on, but using data and evidence, particularly in healthcare and education, which are our primary this thing. So we are basically structured as a sort of non-profit and for-profit, and partly dependent on philanthropy. And I therefore use this quite shamelessly, this opportunity to reach out to all those who listen to please donate at indiaspend.com. Even 500 rupees goes a long way. It doesn't pay my salary, but you will be helping the cause of good journalism. Yeah. So we basically do about a story a day. We combine on-ground reporting with data crunching, usually done by people who have public policy backgrounds. And we distribute these stories free of cost, largely to people who are what we call our publishing partners. So you may not read our stories on India Spend, but you will read it on a Business Standard or a First Post or a Scroll, New Indian Express, Dow Jones Newswires. So we have a lot of partners. So our reach, therefore, is pretty high, despite the fact that we are a small organization. 2014, just ahead of the parliamentary elections in India, which saw the BJP being elected, is when we started factchecker.in. We felt that we needed to fact check statements made by people in public life and do it in a slightly different website and more slightly different team as well. This was beginning to catch on in the United States. There were a bunch of websites that started. I think a couple of news networks also started fact checking their politicians. And we realized that fact checking is different from general news reporting or news reporting as a journalist. So that's how we started Fact Checker, and we continue to till date to fact check statements made by either people or institutions. So it could be, let's say, if the Prime Minister says we have built X number of toilets. So we fact check that and point out, I mean, the numbers would be right mostly, but we would always give the context. And the context is also very critical in, how many toilets were built, where were they built, how long did they take, how many existed before, let's say, this government started off. So that gives you the context, which is also critical. And sometimes, in many cases, we also find that information is not accurate or wrongly presented, and we also reach out to them. So we will reach out to those cabinet ministers or whoever and say that, listen, this is what you said. Do you stand by this? If so, or if not so, then do let us know. So that's factchecker.in. In 2016, for all the reasons I outlined earlier, we started Boom, which is, we realized that misinformation is a different challenge. It flows subterraneanly. It comes into our WhatsApp inboxes, which are end-to-end encrypted. You don't know. And it was around that time that I first noticed, I think in 2015 or 16, that a Reserve Bank, I think it was almost like a seminal moment. A Reserve Bank of India put out a press release saying that there is no problem with Axis Bank or something like that, right? And the thing is, all the mainstream media journalists, my friends, were scratching their heads and saying, but we never put out a story saying there was a problem with Axis Bank or whatever. But the fact is that it had spread on social media, and that too mostly WhatsApp. And that was really like a floodgate. After that, you regularly see, you see governments, specific bodies responding to essentially what are WhatsApp messages. Because at the end of the day, the Minister of Finance of India, I'm using finance because that's a space I guess I'm a little more familiar with, gets the same WhatsApp message that you and I get from some uncle, cousin, auntie, whatever it is. And they say, oh, if I'm receiving it, that means half this country has seen it. So we better put out a clarification. Similarly, in 2017, after GST launched, there was a lot of messages after July about, GST, this happening and that happening and all of that. And many of them were false. And many of them, mainstream media, would never report on it because mainstream media would say, okay, we checked it out, it's fake. So why should we report it? Why should we even touch it? But unfortunately for you, you may be talking about 3 million, but there are 497 million people who are consuming it. And therefore, you have to respond. So that's how Boom was started. And with a specific objective of fighting misinformation. But over time, we've evolved at this point, at least, to two things. We react and we fight, as in we debunk posts, images, videos, and so on. And I'll give you a couple of brand examples. And we also are proactive, as in we do stories where we feel that there is an information vacuum. And if we do a story saying, for instance, what is India's refugee policy? So people who are looking for refugees, Afghanistan, India, will hopefully find that story, and at least their questions will be answered before that misinformation threads start to form. So a couple of years ago, actually, there are some very good brand case studies, including with ITC Ashirvad Atta, about, I don't know if you remember, this was about how atta had plastic in it. And there were these videos where people would take the atta and make it into a ball and chuck it on the wall. Right? And the ball would come back, and people say, look, this is because there's plastic in it. Then there was this other very famous, there was Kurkure, and then there was Lays chips. Right? So someone would open a packet of Lays chips, take it out, and then light a fire under it, with a lighter, and it would burn. And then they said, this is because there's plastic in it. It's actually because there's starch, I think, in it. That's the reason. But the thing is, both of these caused tremendous damage. ITC actually, and maybe you should even get them on your show, you should talk to them about what they went through because of Ashirvad Atta and the loss in sales because of that, the fake news that was spreading, and the time it took them to respond. Because I think the thing which happened, and I'm not sure it would happen similarly today, but a couple of years back, and literally a couple of years back, people were still not clear. How do you react to this animal, right? Because it's all going through WhatsApp. And whereas all the tools you know of are television, print, and so on. So you put advertisements in Times of India or Indian Express, but that doesn't help. because that message is circulating furiously in Eastern India in languages that are not being
or
touched
many
at all.
times you wait for it to tide over. I mean, as a lot of marketing
You
business,
wait for it to tide over.
You feel that this will go away, and then you realize no, it's not going away, and then you wake up and it's got momentum. It's like fire. It's crossed the chasm.
Yeah. And there are many examples like that. And so we cover 3 or 4 areas broadly. I mean, first, I would say is the most tough part, which is the communal, social, and political, which I guess is also the part which causes the most harm, including physical harm, potentially.
Yeah.
The second bucket is health and medicine, which we were doing even before COVID. But that time we were focused on things like Ayurvedic cures for cancer and things like that. But post-COVID, it's become about COVID and now vaccination. The third category, broadly, I would say, is brands, products, and services, which is including the kind of examples I gave you. And in many cases, companies have also reached out to us saying that, we are getting hammered, saying that this product contains something which we know it doesn't, and we are saying it doesn't, but really someone is spreading it. Can you do something about it, and so on?
And tell me, post-COVID, when people actually, I mean, I know you set up a whole framework where you were fact-checking and you were putting up resources which were real and not fake. But there's so much fake things kind of doing the rounds on social media, even during COVID, in terms of oxygen and beds. And I was personally, for my mother-in-law, looking for a bed in Delhi, and I was calling up places, and those were like normal number of somebody has some vendor who's selling, say, pakoras in Delhi or whatever, right? All that was happening. Do you think that has changed? Is there a delta post there of people actually seeking out or having a question in their mind that maybe we should check it? Is it fact? Do you feel that the needle is moving at all in people's mind, or you're saying these are 2 small events, they're not black swans for a dramatic shift?
So I hope that the needle has moved, as I do very sincerely hope. And I know that a lot of people who tried those numbers for hospital beds, for remdesivir, for plasma, even for, let's say, for Leeds to get oxygen cylinders, oxygen concentrators, were doing it out of desperation. And, in desperation, you start calling up anyone and everyone. And somehow, why people do it deliberately and plant numbers which clearly are not the right numbers, I don't know. I've never understood this very well. But clearly, it had become a problem. I mean, it scaled up or escalated very suddenly, and very dramatically, which is why we started SOS India for you, and .com, and where we were at peak verifying helplines at almost 123 cities and towns across India. And literally, there were about 7 people who were physically calling up every number and then taking out the numbers from the app, numbers which were either unserviceable or not responding. And obviously, things would change, right? Suppose you say, okay, hospital beds available in Indore in the morning, by evening it's gone.
It was a moving target.
So by next morning, we would have updated it.
Yeah.
So, and I would see that even on social media, people who were sharing messages after maybe by end May, people were saying, okay, I have verified this, or I have not, please verify this before you, whatever. So I think some people or sections of people, clearly there is an awareness and there is an understanding that, we need to check. But usually it's because you've burnt your fingers or you learned the hard way. Now, there are many instances like this, right? In life as a whole, I think we keep coming across messages, we check and we find out that it's completely false, or some hopefully wiser person in a family group points out that, like in my family group, I'm not very liked because I keep pointing these things out. And I even share this thing. And I can see that some like it, say, oh, great, you've given us, thank you for sending us, or they'll check with me. And others don't like it because it seems to affect their position,
Spoils the narrative, as you said, that the narrative is
spoils the narrative.
Become the opium almost.
So the problem is critical thinking. Are we born with sufficient critical thinking? I guess not. Even if we were born, can narratives be shaped and woven and manipulated? The answer is yes. It has nothing to do with education. It has nothing to do with education. Someday I just want to make a list, which I can literally make next week. The people, the messages they've sent me and their net worth alongside.
Oh, wow.
I just want to do that and just circulate it. And maybe I won't be around the day after that.
So,
but that is how it is.
Let's discuss the role of social media in this. We've discussed a bit of WhatsApp, etc. Again, during the COVID, etc., it's also emerged as a platform which has been a savior, right? People found beds, people found oxygen, people found life-saving drugs. There were doctors who were doing, almost diagnosis live on social. So there was that side of social media that we saw. But at the other end, it's also the hotbed of spreading rumors. It's also the hotbed where, fake news catches fire even before it's almost uncontrollable. Do you feel the issue lies with the framework of social media? Does it need policing? Is that where the root cause is?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, one of those big questions that we are facing as a society today. So as we all know, social media in the way we know it today is 15 years old.
Yeah.
Before that, iPhone came and Facebook came and started becoming bigger, and then Twitter came and so many other platforms came, and Google was, of course, around, and YouTube came. So, as we all know, Facebook, even until about 6 years ago, maybe, was the place where we shared our holiday pictures. Yeah. We found our classmates. We connected with blood donation camps. We created interest groups. I like collecting books or stamps, and I find other people who do that. And that goes on.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's still happening. So, and that's the great thing, including maybe many of those people who found help during COVID, thanks to social media, about saying that, I'm having a problem. I mean, there are people who are saying my oxygen level is down to 80. Someone please help me. And I know, unfortunately, one person I know well and a journalist lost his life.
Oh my God.
But that's how he alerted the world that, he was literally dying. So that's the positive side. I think what's happened in the last 4 to 5 years or 5 to 6 years is really that people have figured that there is, and this technology allows you to do other things as well. And that's how the evil has emerged. And I think what we are seeing today is really the evil side of the internet on social platforms. Yeah. Remember that platforms also drive commerce.
Yeah.
And commerce is something that has obviously evolved to our benefit as consumers. Yeah. Today, whether it's services commerce or product commerce, it's continuously evolving. And when I say services, it could be Uber, it could be Amazon, as a product, and so on and so forth. So all that is the good thing. I mean, that's the good part about it. But I think what we are seeing is in social commerce, we've clearly seen the evil and the rise of the evil, which continues to rise at this point as we speak. I don't know what will happen. And taming it is something that I don't think people in the tech world paid that much attention to, because, as you know, many technology companies are in California, libertarian, left of, it's not left of center, but it's libertarian.
Yeah.
Go post what you want. It doesn't matter. Yeah. If the system somehow doesn't like it, it'll attack it. But you should be free to do what you want. I should be free to do what I want.
I mean, what they haven't factored in is the compounding impact of the platform itself.
Yes. Yeah. So that was then. But I think what's happened in the last 3-4 years is civil society organizations, governments, public policy experts, and many others have begun to push back.
Yeah.
And we can see the pushback, right? Government after government is calling Google and Facebook or Twitter and summoning them and saying, why don't you have this? Why don't you have a compliance officer? Yeah. You cannot allow this post to remain and all that. And give or take, different governments may have slightly different ways of looking at the specific content, but largely, I think most governments have reacted.
Yeah.
Some more in a structured way. In Europe, for instance, some may be less structured, but Senate hearings in the United States or parliamentary committee meetings in India, the issues are the same.
Yeah.
That how can social media companies be better managed?
Yes.
Can they be better self-managed, or should there be regulation that oversees them? So the social media companies, I think, are responding in 2 or 3 ways, and they have. One is, I think, people like Facebook and Google and YouTube have hired thousands of people, mostly through Indian companies, BPO, KPO kind of companies. Indian and non-Indian, and working and who are doing the content moderation and so on. Some of them work with fact checkers like us, and we work with them. So to bring in the physical element of it. So there's stuff that technology will do. There's stuff that rule-based content moderation, for instance, will do. And there's stuff that more
manually
physical fact checking will do. Yeah. So they're doing that. But I think, even if you take out the governments and the public policy and all that, advertisers are very powerful as well. Yeah. 3 years ago, if I remember correctly, Procter & Gamble, Levers, and one more brand or a couple of other brands pulled out of YouTube. Yeah. Saying that, we're not going to be posting, our ads cannot appear next to some jihadi videos. The sum and substance of it. And YouTube had to, obviously beef up its act or get its act together and figure out how to, make sure that the content was clear. So even if, I'm not saying they did, but even if they said, okay, political pressure, governments, and we can manage, but advertising, it's tough. Advertisers, you cannot, particularly if they become sensitive. More recently, advertisers pulled out of YouTube saying that there was pedophilic content.
Yeah.
And the thing was, and even I was shocked when I read the headline in the first couple of lines. And then I read on and I realized that the advertisers were pulling out not because of children's videos. They were pulling out because of some of the comments in the comment section. So that is the kind of level of, let's say, integrity and quality and purity, if I can use that word, that advertisers want at one level. And I guess a safe space that parents and governments and others want, particularly when it comes to politics or other things. So overall, the pressure is huge. Is it sufficient? I don't know. Because things happen. Just 2 years ago, there was a gunman who walked into a mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, and started shooting people. He live streamed the whole thing on Facebook. And Facebook systems did not catch it. Right? Because, how do you do that? At one level.
There's a limitation to,
So, but today, but that is not the way, a government will say, I don't care how you do it. You better find a way. So they have, I think today, as I understand it, they're able to respond very quickly to something like this in seconds, though even seconds can do a lot of damage. But I think in the race between good and evil in this part of the social internet, I think evil is winning right now.
The spread is so fast, you're saying.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Spread is so fast. In countries like India, Dheeraj, as you know very well, we have gone from, within 4 years or so, we have gone from maybe 75-100 million mobile phone subscribers, smartphone subscribers, to about 500 million smartphone subscribers. Data rates have come down. So there's been a huge infrastructure accompaniment, which has obviously driven the phenomenon of dissemination of information and therefore also misinformation.
And nobody's bothered there, right? Nobody's bothered there to check that this could be wrong. You're just consuming it because you are used to consuming narratives from media, whether it's television or newspaper. You're just used to, you never questioned it.
Right. And that's really digital literacy, as we call it. Which is not the same as literacy. Earlier we used to say, okay, any word in cold print is the truth. The newspaper, when you pick it up.
That was the semiotics of it, right? It's written is the truth.
Yes. So I guess people do the same thing when it comes to, you put an image and you say something below that. It looks like this is from, some newspaper or some organized outlet. So you believe it. When it comes on WhatsApp. So anyway, I think on the bright side, I would always hope that sometimes if there's too much of it, it results in natural selection.
And it also have a counter impact, right? We'll take a quick break, Govind, and come back and talk a bit more about how data can be used for storytelling.
Hey everybody, it's been a great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On The Habit Coach, Ashton is in conversation with Dre Baldwin, CEO of Work on Your Game, Inc. They discuss the athletic mindset and what it takes to be a great athlete. On All Things Policy, Arjun Garge speaks to Atish Padi about fantasy sport platforms and Karnataka's online gambling ban. On the Life Manifesto, Zarina decodes the concept of emotional maturity. I wonder what emotionally mature people really do. On Naan Kari, Sadaf and Archit are joined by author Sudha Menon. They discuss comfort food and Sudha's upcoming book. On Say No to Drama, Chetna cuts through the drama around Instagram posts and comments. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, Slay Coffee, Intel, Kotak Mahindra Bank, and Oxfam India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back, Govind. Really enjoying this conversation. I want to shift gears a bit and I wanted to discuss with you the role of data, right? You talk about the role of data and using data to tell stories. Also using data to impact public discourse and public opinion, right? So where are you on that? Are there situations where you think that use of data could have helped change perception at a mass narrative level? Or do you feel that people still buy the soft narrative and people are inclined to buy the soft narrative? The mind is collectively being wired to ignore hard fact and hard data. Where's your experience on this piece?
I think so. You're right. And you've really summed up what anyone would say. But and I would also, take some blame for that, because finally we are the communicators. So let's say it's my grand dream that we can change or improve the quality of public discourse by using data, right? That means next time you and I have an argument, I will use some data point to substantiate. For instance, I try to use a data point by saying that, an ASCII study showed that only 12 companies had genuine ads out of 300 companies, So that's a data point. Now, you may not believe it. That's a different issue, but at least it frames the issue. Rather than me saying, I think those ads were fake and maybe I'm telling you I'm convinced all the advertisements are fake. But if you ask me suddenly, how do you know? And then I'm saying, no, this is my intuition or based on my reading of the newspaper or whatever. But the challenge, Dheeraj, is that we have to communicate it. We have to communicate the core message, which is that you need to use data, and we have to communicate the data. So today, unfortunately, a lot of our messaging is picked up, but it's only picked up by people who are in a way already converted. The challenge for us is to say, how do we convert more and more people? And therefore, can we make our use of data and the telling of data better and better or simpler and simpler? If the big guru in this space is Hans Rosling, who was the master at, using data and very, very long and visualization, right? So it's a holy grail for us. Are we reaching more people than we started out with? Of course, definitely. And a lot of young people, but many of those young people who consume us and reach out to us are also in some ways already converted. I mean, they come from public policy backgrounds. They've done a master's in economics or they're pursuing, let's say, MBA. I mean, people who are already tuned in. So I think the challenge still is, it's a big challenge and it's a big task for us to ensure that, we communicate the importance of data to more people and also find ways to communicate it better and smarter. Which I think I would confess out at the outset and outright that we have not really done enough.
So we've had some experience there, Govind, right? I mean, for example, we did a campaign for HDFC Bank on blood donation, right? And typical blood donation, right? You say, we need X amount of blood and we get only Y, so please come and donate. And nobody really cares for that. And we realized that the insight in India is that in India, you would go to any extent to help somebody that you love or that you care for. But you wouldn't donate or you wouldn't do charity for somebody who you really don't know. So we found this guy, right, Mr. Mathani, who's been donating blood every year, and he's now 65 and he cannot donate blood. And we made a big deal about him, right? So we got people fall in love with Mr. Mathani. They look at him, he's a real guy, has been donating, and now he cannot donate. And he's saying, if you will not donate blood, he's going to go and donate. Right? And we put a ticker in front of his house and so on and so forth. And we put a number that if you reach this number, he will not. And that worked beautifully. I mean, that year we gathered more blood than we managed every year through all of that, because we made data personal. Right? We humanized data and we told the story in a way that people could connect with it. So that could be one of the solves.
It is, absolutely. And I think, particularly in areas like, we've seen it in areas like understanding why children drop out of school. Everyone said that everyone, at least until recently, assumed that this was because, the parents were conservative. And it turned out that, and this is sort of a data and evidence play, right? And it turns out that girl children often drop out of schools because there are no toilets. Good toilets for girls. So as they get older,
and period issues. I mean, we work with Whisper a lot on that.
So those are reasons why they drop out. And so therefore, it was not an education or a social issue challenge, but it was an infrastructure challenge.
And the supply.
So that is the power of data. I mean, when you understand it, of course, for those who know and manage public policy, they know this. But sometimes when ordinary people know it and understand it, they're able to put pressure upwards.
No, absolutely.
Saying that, okay.
In fact, we do a lot of communication around that. And the data is 1 in 5, right? Girl children.
Correct.
And we have a program called Keep Girls in School that we're championing with Whisper. And again, sensitizing that, making that, friendly to people to capture that information.
Exactly. So that's a very good example and on real ground. And, there are many such examples about, for instance, in education, where now we are seeing, women's participation in the workforce reduce. I mean, it went up and then it's now coming down. Including because women are better educated, maybe they're dropping out of the workforce, or maybe there is sufficient income in the family and they don't feel the need, though they could. So there are many reasons, but it's these are all shifts which unless you start looking at data, you will not understand. Then how do you frame policy? We all have to, we all know it, I guess, but we have to remind ourselves, if you fix education and healthcare in a country, most of your problems will get solved. Foundational problems. There may be other problems, but I'm saying foundational problems, if you fix these two. And it's a circular kind of thing, because as you educate, and particularly if you educate women and girls, automatically the way they bring up their children, the
it changes the whole chain.
Everything changes. And I'm sure your studies have shown you that as well. And the country kind of, everything improves, right? And to understand this, particularly in a large country like India, you need data. You need evidence.
Absolutely.
So anyway, but that's for policymakers. I'm saying, so how do we turn that data around and use it to tell people? I think one of the biggest opportunities and challenges for us right now is climate change.
Yeah.
We worked on a project called Breathe, which we kicked off in 17 under India Spend. And this all started because, there were these articles that appeared in foreign media saying that how Delhi was becoming impossible to live in.
Yeah.
Okay. And so we said that, okay, how do you measure it? And we found out that there was no way to measure it. There was only a couple of monitoring devices that the Central Pollution Control Board or the Delhi Pollution Control Board had, but these were all offline and, they once in 1 month, you could go and collect the data and so on. And the government was just beginning to set up what became the SAFAR network. And there was one monitor, I think, on top of the US embassy in Chanakyapuri. Which was, you could actually see what the real-time PM2.5 and PM10, I think PM2.5 numbers were, particulate matter. So we actually set up, and we found out that basically the cost of sensors had come down. So we set up our own network of monitoring stations, and we launched it in Delhi. Yeah. We set up 20 monitoring stations, mostly kept in balconies of friends, which were, and the sensors were costing only $30. And mated to GPRS transmitters, basically your mobile phone SIM cards, like a box. And it would measure and send the data, and you could actually see it real time on a map.
Yeah.
And you could zoom in. So you could say Vasant Kunj, is this much, Shanti Niketan is this much, and Connaught Place, wherever we had sensors. And for the first time, it became clear how bad the situation was. Till then, everyone described the problem anecdotally, figuratively. I'm having this thing, my children are having problem, I keep going back, we have to buy nebulizers. But no one ever put data to it. So actually, that's for us as India Spend, that has been our biggest success in a way, that we could find a way to draw attention not just to the pollution problem, but also to the larger problem. Pollution is a manifestation of climate change.
Yes.
I mean, it's not a direct manifestation, but it's a manifestation. So at peak, we were monitoring over 20 this thing. People could start seeing real time. All the news, many of the news channels started taking that data. Some 2 news channels wanted devices on their terraces because they said, no, we want to show what it is right here. And they did that.
Amazing. And
predictably or not predictably, the AAP government in Delhi started fighting back, saying that these are all low-cost devices. And, real devices have to be, they're much more. They cost $15,000.
Yeah.
Which is true. They do. These cost only $200. But the fact is that using good software and, the right amount of pre-testing.
Yes. And you started the conversation.
You can make sure that you capture the trend.
Yeah.
So, we are not performing laboratory experiments, right? So people accepted that, this was good enough. I did not need to know whether the AQI or the air quality index number was 800 or whether it was 789.9. Right?
Yeah, that's the point.
It is crazy, and it is definitely in the right direction. So I think people accepted that what we were doing was accurate and important. And around the time the government also started working in it, Delhi government said, okay, we will set up more stations. And I don't know, but though that project never worked out, I think. But the fact is that air quality today is a page 1 mention point, particularly in winter.
Absolutely.
Earlier it wasn't. Earlier you say, you only see weather and
you would say fog. There's fog in Delhi or smog in Delhi.
Fog. So we can take some credit for that. So I think that's one area where we managed to, use communication method or whatever, and we made it real time. The real time thing worked.
Yeah.
And we tried up with Twitter, by the way.
Yeah.
So what would happen is you just had to say #Breathe Connaught Place.
Yeah.
And Twitter would send you an image of the data.
Amazing.
Saying that, okay, this is it and it's fair or low or whatever it is. So we tied up with Twitter for that. So I think climate change broadly, as we look ahead, and we are trying to crack, we are doing a lot of thinking on that. We can, the number of extreme monsoon events that we are seeing even right in Mumbai where both of us live is increasing.
Yeah.
And the data is already showing that. So we want to see how we can work on these kind of data points. So which people feel it and are already feeling it.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will help expand the discourse.
Yeah. So last question, Govind, I know we're running out of time. What are the challenges of being a media entrepreneur, right? Building media brands. I know there'll be lots, but what are the top ones that you're facing right now?
So I think the big challenge is clearly resources. We are not built on advertising models, nor are we built on whipping up frenzy, at least what we are doing. You can subscriber model can work pretty well if you're able to, whip up some kind of emotion.
Yeah.
We don't do that.
Yeah.
So we've taken the position that we want to be without any opinion. We want to use data and evidence in everything we do. So, I mean, resources are tough.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some who support us and have supported us through and through, and we are in perpetual gratitude to them. And we just hope that more people will support our efforts and subscribe to what our offerings. And it all costs very less, the price of maybe a coffee or two in Starbucks. And that goes a long way. So, and I also realize that the challenge is equally upon us to communicate our needs better, and also the importance of all of this.
Yeah.
I have to finally tell you why this is important.
Yeah.
If I have failed in telling you that, or if I failed to communicate that, it's a failure.
Yeah.
Right. So that is something that I'm also. So it's a frustration. It is a frustration, and it's also like a looking glass, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to tell yourself that yes, I have to keep thinking of how I can rephrase this or do this differently. So yeah, I would say those are some of the challenges of being a media entrepreneur, particularly in this kind of space where we have chosen niches. We are going after specific markets, but usually the benefits, the fact that we've got so much good, response, and particularly from young people who want to work with us, we've got so much acknowledgement by public policy makers across the world.
Yeah.
One of our, at IndiaSpend particularly, one of our achievements in a way is the number of citations we get, high quality citations we get from leading academic institutions around the world. And I would argue that we are one of the highest for what we do.
That's amazing.
Definitely for a quasi-media organization.
Yeah.
So those are elements of pride.
Yeah.
And the fact that we can do something to shape the quality of public discourse. And also that we've survived 10 years. Somehow.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Also, I think the culture is coming to a stage where, this is bubbling up, right? And there will be more and more value to the work that you're doing and the data that you're bringing to the table.
I hope so.
Yeah. So a part of the conversation, Govind, is when I turn the mic back to you and you get to grill me back as I've been grilling you for the last 1 hour. So all yours.
Right, Dheeraj, and that's obviously something I'm looking forward to. So let me kick off. According to you, Dheeraj, what's been the biggest challenge the pandemic has posed to the world of marketing, that is?
I think the biggest challenge that pandemic has brought is really about people. Yeah, it's been, because we've all been locked in homes, right? We've been trying to run organizations, and it's been now 18 months, right? How do you run organizations? People are facing threat to their health, to their loved ones, to relationships, to mental well-being. I would say those are the biggest challenges that we have faced for our organization. And marketing, advertising is a very brainstorming, creative space. You are together, you're doing it. And that energy has gone zero. And that's been, we've suffered the most because of that, I would say.
So would you say that's the thing that you miss the most about the pre-pandemic world as well? The energy, creativity.
Yeah, that only, right? For example, I love the fact that I don't have to spend 4 hours in traffic anymore. I love the fact that, door to door, I'm not doing a flight, which is 5 hour one way and 5 hour another way, and a 45-minute in Bangalore, meeting in Bangalore. So I love all of that. I love the efficiency going away from that perspective. But the energy of people, creating together, seeing face to face, because just the Zoom window and you don't get to see what's happening behind that window is very, very limiting.
Right, Dheeraj. So, what's the name of a book that's changed your perspective on life? And obviously, I know you're a prolific author yourself, so you can't name your own book.
I know. I like Nassim Taleb's writing a lot. So I would say Anti-Fragile, right, in a big way. And I mean, the whole theory that, the world chases the event, right? So, for example, he spoke about that fact that, terrorism has destroyed the world. Now, all dollar in the world will chase in preventing terrorism, but what will screw the world now won't be terrorism as much as something else, and that's what has happened. So the need for us to be fluid and to be able to imagine what we need to go after rather than looking at the past.
How do you apply that in your own life?
Oh, hugely. For example, when pandemic hit us, Govind, foot one day, right here we are 450 people at Leo Burnett and we haven't gone to office. And I woke up that morning and I was like, what would these people be doing? What would they be thinking, right? And we don't know how long this is going to go. What are we going to do? How are we going to navigate? One is life and other stuff, but people need purpose, right? You want to wake up every day morning and say, what am I going to do today? And therefore we created a tool, right? We created a compass that I called 036 and I named it short-term thinking, right? Because I realized that everything in the world was about long-term thinking. All business models, all brand thinking, all policy was in 5-year horizon or a 10-year horizon. But here it is about short-term thinking. Am I going to survive today? And I said, okay, 0, 3, and 6. So we said, what are the culture views or patterns in 0? What are the culture views going to be in 3 and 6? And what are my equities as a company or a brand? And what can we do? right? So, for example, with Whisper, we realized that pandemic had its own patriarchy. So girls and boys were at home. Boys were getting the devices to study and log into online classes. Girls were being sent back to chores. And therefore, with Whisper, we set up something called as Mobile Shala, a platform for girls, a part of this program where they can access education at their pace through feature phone in their language without being a nuisance to their family.
Yeah, and I saw one of those ads on YouTube. It was quite nice. I mean, there's that girl who's looking through the window.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it was a beautiful ad. I didn't realize it was yours.
Yeah, it's our work. Yeah.
Great. So, and I'm assuming that also answers in some ways partly, and you can expand. The other question is, what's the positive change that you've seen in your organization post the pandemic?
Yeah. So again, I think it goes back. I think what threatens you also becomes your biggest strength, Govind. You would realize that. So I think people coming shoulder to shoulder, right? I mean, I would say if there's one thing which defines my culture today is the sense of camaraderie, right? I mean, the way people have stood up to help each other without pursuit of their personal kind of a goal, right? So we've become one collective, we've become a village. This wouldn't have happened otherwise.
So slightly shifting gears. So, you're a creative organization. You need creative people working with you. You need people with high energy. Yeah. You need people who understand what's going on. You need social scientists as much as creators and, creative people. So what's the one or two interview questions that you feel reveal the most or the most ideal tenets of a good and potential employee?
So this is one question I ask, Govind, is that tell me one story, right, that you are proud of and that gave you joy in life. I don't care whether it got celebrated. I don't care whether your boss liked it. I don't care whether your client liked it. But tell me a story that gave you personal joy. I always ask that question. And to me, I mean, that's the game changer question that I ask.
And what's the kind of answer that you've got, or give me an illustration of an answer that you've got which has impressed
typically
you?
Typically the answers that make the person cross the gate, or maybe could be something which is very small as a story, but brought that person. So for example, somebody said, I did this piece of ad and so on and so forth. But the joy was when it came back through my mother's WhatsApp network back to me. Right. And that, to the conversation we've been having today is a test that it's actually floated.
And that's a very interesting and opportune note to end on, Dheeraj. Thank you so much once again to sum up for this opportunity to speak with you, to hear your thoughts. And you can reach me at Govind Ethiraj on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn. I am not on most of the other platforms that you most probably are, particularly if you're younger than me. And and do visit our websites at indiaspend.org, factchecker.in and boomlive.in, and keep the good fight up against misinformation and use data and evidence to improve the quality of all our lives.
It's awesome.
Thank you. And it's been a really wonderful hour and 10 minutes or so.
Amazing. Thank you so much for doing this. All the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, Govind.
See you.
In the race against good and evil, at least in this space, unfortunately, currently evil is winning. When we look at social media as an instrument of reaching out to the audiences to build brands and businesses, we see a very different side of social media. What we saw today with Govind is a side of social platforms that can actually get sinister. It can not only harm social fabric, but can be harmful for brands and businesses as well. It's for this reason I feel that the world of business must back this movement against fake. From the example that Govind shared of a picture of a young Air Force officer with Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman being passed around as a mother-daughter picture, and people wanting to believe that story despite knowing the fact that they weren't mother-daughter. That makes me wonder, if people want to believe a good story so much, how can we use the power of storytelling itself to provoke them to check the facts the next time? I have a lot of heart for how Govind and his team went about building data around the issue of air pollution in Delhi by actually procuring and installing the devices that captured the air quality index. It's a compelling case of how, when we put data behind discourse, we can actually make real change happen. As I end this podcast, my mind is buzzing on how we can help the cause of data-based, truth-based discourses in the society. What did this podcast make you think?
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does, or want to know how we could improve online privacy, or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.
Come learn and experience the ABCDs of being queer with me, Shunetro,
and me, Farhad,
on our show, Gay BCD.
The two of us take you through our stories and experiences of being gay men in the city of Mumbai and have candid
and sometimes downright scandalous
conversations about sexuality, gay culture, and everything in between.
Catch new episodes of Gay BCD every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get all your podcasts from.